The first time I ever went to the theatre was here in Swansea, but not here in the Grand Theatre. In those days, there were three theatres, major theatres in Swansea. There was the Empire, there was the Grand, and there was the Palace. But out of the three, the Empire was considered to be the theatre to go to. It was a luxurious place, wonderful venue, and the biggest venue too. It's now where, indeed, the Pound Shop is in Oxford Street, a very different sort of building now. The first thing I ever saw was embedded in my memory, and I can still remember entire scenes from it, and it was a pantomime. It was Robinson Crusoe, and it starred the wonderful Max Wall, who I came to love and revere as many, many years later. And I can still remember sitting in about the fifth or sixth row of the stalls with my parents, and the front tabs opening on a street scene which was so colourful and so lively and so bright and vivid. I can still see it, and I can still see the Max Wall routine on a desert island with one palm tree, the classic desert island, and amazingly. Professor Wolofsky, his wonderful creation, had managed to escape the shipwreck and with a piano, which was absolutely wonderful. And there he had his piano, and he did the Professor Wolofsky routines on the desert island, which I remember tears were coming out of my eyes. I thought it was so funny. And indeed, we had an upright piano at home, and for months after that, I would just spend hours just reliving the routines on the upright. I couldn't play the piano, but I did the routines that I'd loved in Robinson Crusoe. And then there was Harry Seacombe in Puss in Boots, which, again, I liked. Although that wasn't so successful because my cousin took me to see that, and she bought what she thought were excellent seats up in this circle. But because of the person sitting in front of me, I could only see half the stage. So I could only see Harry Seacombe when he came down stage right, and when he went stage there. And I didn't want to say anything because I felt that that would have been rude to my cousin who'd spent so much money on the seat. So I saw half of that pantomime, stage right half. And then I grew up a little bit. I was about 5 or 6, I suppose, when I saw the first pantomimes. And then later I joined, I became a little bit as if I wanted to perform and act. And so I joined the Swansea Little Theatre, that in those days were based in the Palace Theatre in Swansea. My mother was a singer stroke actor. She'd performed in 3 consecutive taking the lead, in fact, in 3 consecutive productions of the Swansea Amateurs in the Empire, and then went professional and performed throughout the war years on the radio, as well as in the West End. I wanted to follow in her footsteps, not as a singer, I couldn't sing a note, but certainly as an actor. I performed on the stage of the Palace Theatre in 2 shows, actually, one after the other. One was a long-forgotten play now called Escapade, directed by the wonderful Megan Evans, and the second one was Maria Martin, or The Murder in the Red Barn. So I had great fun there, soon, at about the same time, I started coming to the Grand for the very first time. And in those days, the Grand really, apart from the pantomime, the Grand was really John Chilver's repertory seasons, and they were fantastic. I can't actually remember how many weeks of the year they took, but it was virtually the remainder of the year that the pantomime wasn't in memory. I seem to think of it as that way. And they had a wonderfully eclectic mix of plays. They would do an Agatha Christie one week, and something really, like Bertolt Brecht. I remember seeing Mother Courage here at one stage, incredibly complex play, to put on that in a week. It was just a wonderful variety of theatre, which I suppose was my introduction to live theatre. It was the only theatre that was producing live theatre in Swansea and the environs at that particular time, on a regular basis, and it was wonderful. And I had a season ticket, and I always remember, when I say a season ticket, you could buy a particular seat in a particular area of the theatre, and that was yours on a particular night. Mine was Friday night, and every Friday night I would sit on the front row of the circle. I can't remember the number of the seat now, but it was that was mine every Friday night for the year or the 2 years that I was there. And I can remember John Chilvers, the great man, really, who kept theatre going. He kept the Grand going, without any doubt, with his enthusiasm and his damn hard work. And every time you walked in through the doors of the box office into the foyer, there was John Chilvers, immaculate, with an evening suit on, and he welcomed every person who came into that foyer, whether he knew you or not, and he greeted you, and it was a wonderful sort of feeling that you were being made welcome there. And you know, it's something that impressed me so much. I try to nowadays, with Fluellen and our shows here in the Grand, in the Arts Wing in particular, to do the same thing with Lunchtime Theatre and other shows. I like to be in the foyer before the show, and I like to welcome people as they come, particularly the people who come regularly. If they get the same warm glow that I got when I used to come here as a theatre goer, then it's job done, really. And so for 2 years I saw everything, and then for time after I came and cherry-picked. I didn't have a season ticket after that, but I came and cherry-picked. One of the shows I particularly remember in the 1960 season of the Grand Theatre Rep was Charlie's Aunt, a wonderful Victorian farce. Brandon Thomas wrote it, and it's about the only show he's remembered for. I think he wrote other plays, but certainly that's the one that you remember. Wonderful, a classic example of running through doors, mistaken identities, slapstick comedy. It's a wonderful show. And before the show started, there was an elderly gentleman who was sitting next to me just seconds before the show started, and he leant over to me and he said, I was about 12 or 13, I suppose, when this happened. Is this the first time you've ever seen Charlie's Aunt? And I said, yes, it is. He said, oh, I wish it was my first time. I kind of remembered that, and I can understand what he meant, because the show was absolutely wonderful. And probably the most memorable of all the rep shows that I saw here. Well, as it happened, about 20, 25 years later, I was then directing shows for a living, and I took on a production of Charlie's Aunt in London, and I sort of kind of realised what an amazing thing it was to have created a production of Charlie's Aunt in a week, as John Chilvers had done. I mean, we had a 3-4 week rehearsal period, I can't remember now. And we needed every day of that, every hour, every second of that. It is a massively complex play. Technically, it's a very complex play. And I thought, how on earth did John Chilvers ever manage to do such a wonderful production in a week? And amazingly, a few years later, I happened to bump into him in a do in London. And I had a chance to have a very, very short chat with him. And I asked him that very question. How did you manage to do that in such a short time? And he said, well, to a certain extent, he said, when you're doing repertory on that sort of basis, 1 a week, art kind of goes out the window, and you have to get into a kind of painting by numbers routine. For example, he said, I always had a template whereby my leading man always made his first entrance upstage right, and my leading lady always made her first entrance upstage left, regardless of the play. And he said, once I had that in my mind, everything else seemed to fall into place. And now, you know, many years later, I'm doing lunchtime theatre, which is about, I suppose, the closest to repertory theatre that we're doing, where we we do a show a month, so it's a very quick turnaround. And we do lots of different plays, different genres. I have that sort of template in my mind too. I have an idea of where the actors are going to come from to begin with, and then everything falls into place. And I don't know whether I do that consciously or subconsciously, because that's what John Chilvers told me. If it is subconsciously, then, well, thank you, John, because you've really saved me a lot of work in lunchtime theatre. Around the turn of the millennium, I had the idea of forming Fluellen Theatre Company. At that particular time, I was working as a jobbing director, first and foremost, and I was working working in America, I was working in Europe and the UK, and enjoying the work enormously. But the travelling was not attractive, and I can remember I directed a show in Essex. And I was driving along the M4 back home to Swansea. I'd lived in London for several years and I returned to Swansea. And somewhere about Bridgend, this flash of lightning came down at about 3 o'clock in the morning and gave me the idea. I'd had experience running theatre companies before. I'd had a pub theatre company in Richmond, in Surrey, during the 1980s, which produced lunchtime theatre and evening theatre, and had been reasonably successful. But I felt that I wanted to cut down the travelling enormously, so why not focus all my attentions on directing shows in Swansea? But there was another reason as well. I'm very fond of classical theatre, always have been. That has been my thing, classical theatre. And Swansea at that particular time had a dearth of classical theatre. Shakespeare, for example. You'd be lucky if you saw 3 or 4 professional Shakespeares a year, and 2 of those would probably be open-air Shakespeares. And so I felt that possibly was a gap in the market. There were 2 really good theatre companies in Swansea at that particular time. There was Frantic Assembly and there was Volcano Theatre Company, but they were majoring on physical theatre and doing it very, very well. I wasn't particularly interested in physical theatre as to work on myself. So I felt classical theatre there was a bit of a gap. So we formed Fluellen Theatre Company. Fluellen's name has classical meanings anyway. Fluellen, of course, was a captain in Shakespeare's Henry V. So he was a Welshman. He was also the first part I ever played in my life, when we did an excerpt from Henry V, St. David's Day, when I was 9 years of age, in Grange Primary School in Swansea. And of course, he had the Shakespeare connection. And there is a joke in the name as well, because of course it should be Fluellen. But Shakespeare, like lots of other people, couldn't do the double L's, so he called him Fluellen. And so there we are. So that was the decision for the name Fluellen. And we did a Shakespeare, we did Macbeth, but not in the Grand Theatre. We did it in the No Sign Wine Bar in Wine Street, and I don't know why I happened to be there, and I happened to wander down to the cellar, and the cellar looked like a Scottish castle that Macbeth might possibly have lived in. Stone floors, stone walls, water was running down the walls at certain places. I thought, this looks great. So we did a Theatre in the Round production there, which was successful. We toured it to a similar venue in Cardiff. And the response was strong enough to make me feel, well, maybe this shouldn't be the one and only production. And we heard that the Grand Theatre were looking for shows to put on their then fairly new Arts Wing stage. So we came along in 2001 and we put on a production of Henrik Ibsen's play Ghosts. Very powerful play. And about a fortnight before the show began, was to take place, my wife and I came to see another production of a play that was being put on, which was a very nice production. But in those days, the Arts Wing was just a shell, an open space. It had no raked seating whatsoever. And the previous company had decided that they wanted to have people in conventional fashion. We were sitting in row 4 and really couldn't see anything. The sight lines were really bad. And I remember turning to Claire, my wife, at that time and saying, we can't do ghosts this way. Nobody will see it, as we planned to do. So thinking back to the pub theatre, I thought, right, okay, let's do it theatre in the round, where we can have the audience obviously sitting all the way around, and redesigned the show then in order to accommodate that. And it was a huge success, simply because I think people, huge artistic success. I think people were slow to come in, but nobody had seen theatre in the round in those days, and we became known as we started then producing plays on a regular basis in the Arts Wing, and very few people had seen theatre in the round before, and we became known as the Theatre in the Round Company. And then in about 2000, and I think it must have been 2007, 2008, the decision was made that tiered seating would be put in 3 sides of the Arts Wing, which is terrific. But we still do some shows, not all now, but we still do some shows in the round, because it's a staging that I like working in. It's a staging which our audience quite like. It gives them a sort of immediacy in the action of the play, which can be quite exciting. You sit there before the show begins, and you can plainly see the person sitting opposite you, a member of the audience sitting opposite you, and your immediate thought is, oh my God, what if I start yawning and he sees me? Well, what if he starts picking his nose and I've got to watch that? And but as soon as the lights go and the actors come on stage, it's all absorbing, and you're just not aware of anybody else in the audience. It's a fantastic way of staging a show, and I've always liked that. I've always liked seeing the whites of the actors' eyes. I remember Claire, my wife, and I went to see Les Miserables when it first opened in the West End, and the only seats we could get were the back row of the stalls in, I think it was the Cambridge Theatre. It was a huge theatre in London. And to be perfectly honest with you, we were so far away from the action, we could have been sitting in a different theatre. And we came out of Les Miserables, the only 2 people, I think, in the country that were totally underwhelmed by Les Miserables. I like to see the whites of the actors' eyes when I'm in the audience, and I think it's as a performer, when you're performing with the audience sitting in such close proximity, it gives us an urgency which is wonderful for an actor. And so we made an agreement with the Grand that we would be their theatre company in residence in the Arts Wing, and we produce pre-COVID, we were producing 3 major productions a year, one of which was always Shakespeare. And then we then started bringing in about 2005, 2006, lunchtime theatre, 9 different shows a year. So that's something that I'm particularly proud of, because we have promoted new writers in a wealth of plays. They've managed to hone their craft with us and have gone on to many other things. We have a very good, close relationship with the creative writing course at Swansea University, where we have an input into their end-of-year shows, where we do excerpts and therefore also first dibs on the good plays so that we can put them on in lunchtime theatre. But the main focus always has been and always will be the classical theatres we put on in the evenings. Shakespeare, as I say, is always one of the mainstays of every year. And indeed, in 2006, 2016, I beg your pardon, we had a whole year of Shakespeare, because that was the 400th anniversary of his death. So we thought this was time for a real junket, and we had 4 major Shakespeares: Richard III, As You Like It, Macbeth, and The Tempest. We had a whole series of lunchtime theatres to fit in with this, which were instructions were given to the playwrights: write a show which is influenced by a Shakespeare play. We had one absolutely brand new full-length play which was influenced by Shakespeare, called Lear and Company. And also we had lots of fringe events as well about Shakespeare's birthday, Shakespeare's sonnets, which we spilled over to do in the Dylan Thomas Centre here in Swansea. So that was quite a year, and we got a lot of very good sponsorship from a very good backer of ours, Peter Lynn Partners, who are a law firm here in Swansea, and they were very supportive and very helpful, and without them we couldn't have done something as spectacular and it was all-encompassing as that. So we're very grateful to them for their ongoing support there. But every year we will continue now. We've got some exciting things coming up. For example, in 2017, we produced a play called Granton Street. It was the professional premiere of a play which had been written in the 1930s by Philip Burton. Philip Burton, of course, was the mentor of Richard Burton, and in fact, Richard Jenkins took his name from his mentor and became Richard Burton, and stayed a lifelong friend of Philip Burton, of Richard Burton for the rest of his life. But Philip Burton had written 2 plays, one of which was a play called Granton Street, which was based on a fictional Welsh valley town where there was going to be a general election in the 1930s. It had been performed by an amateur company that Philip Burton was associated with in Port Talbot when it was first written, and in a very truncated version on the BBC Home Service on the radio. But we gave it the first ever professional production. The historian Angela V. John had discovered this play, was very keen on it being performed. She approached us with a view to doing it, and we were very happy to do it. It was heralded as one of the great lost masterpieces of Welsh 20th century theatre. One of the great thrills was we actually took it to the school in which Philip Burton and Richard Burton had been at, where Philip Burton had taught Richard Burton in Port Talbot, and we performed it in a gala evening in the school hall where Philip Burton had taught Richard Burton, which was a memorable evening. So that was in 2017, and then had COVID not hit, we were then going to do what we're now going to be doing later this year, 2022, which is give the world premiere of Granton Street's sequel called White Collar, and it takes the story of the Davis family 3 years nearer to the Second World War. And one of the things that we're going to be doing is going to be doing these plays in repertory so that people could come along and see consecutive performances, one of Granton Street, which we're reviving, and one of the new play, which is White Collar, with the same cast in it. So that's something really exciting, which we're looking forward to doing in the autumn. There was an almost when we did Under Milkwood, in as much as it was the concept of the production that there was a voiceover for the first and the second voices. That an actor didn't appear on stage; it was a voiceover. And I had a budget, so I thought, well, I could pay a name to do a couple of hours' work and pre-record it, and then we could play it as a pre-recorded thing. But none of the names that I wanted were available to do it, so I ended up doing it myself, live, which was probably the best way of doing it in retrospect. I sat on the side of the stage with a microphone and I could see the stage sideways on and with a microphone. And I did do the voice, first voice and the second voice from a microphone at the side of the stage. And I kind of managed to insinuate myself on stage for the curtain call at the end with a microphone in my hand so everybody knew who I was. But that is as far as it's ever gone. I've taken a curtain call at the Grand, but I've never performed on the stage as an actor. Yeah, post-COVID, I think that there is a genuine sense of not only of things getting back to normal, but that 2 years of COVID has refocused every theatre practitioner's mind in some way or other, away from just carrying on as we've always been doing. And it's been a very useful refocusing exercise for all of us, particularly here in Swansea, because we have a lot of interesting new things starting. There's a huge arena, for example, just literally across the road from here, the Grand. There's a music venue opening up in the old Albert Hall Cinema. And I think, you know, there's a feeling that maybe the Grand is going to get swamped in amongst all this. But I don't get this. I really don't. I mean, Cardiff has an arena. It also has a big music venue, two, if you include St David's Hall as well. And the theatre thrives, the new theatre thrives in Cardiff. So why? What is the new theatre done there? Well, for a start, it has longer runs, which I think is important. Even if there was something you desperately wanted to see, if it was only on for one night, maybe you aren't able to see it. We all have commitments for time. And also it focuses on drama. Now, I'm not saying that the Grand needs to focus on drama, but certainly we in the arts wing in particular get good drama audiences. It varies, obviously, but there's a good hard core of supporters. And we know that they're our supporters. They don't necessarily come to see anything in the main house. And, rather sadly, some of the main house audiences don't come to see us in the arts wing. It functions as two separate theatres. Very interesting exercise. When we first started coming here, the then manager of the Grand, Gary Isles, asked me if I'd be happy to have reduced price tickets for Grand Theatre Club members. So as they do in the main house, they could come and see shows at a discount in the arts wing. I readily agreed, obviously. But when we did an analysis at the end of the year, nobody from the Grand Theatre Club had come to see any of our shows. And we know, for example, that there are people who come to see our shows because they tell us this, that don't necessarily go to see drama in the main house. And I think it's a matter of concentrating on playing to our strengths. We can expand in the arts wing, in the studio space, to present things and bring in greater drama audiences, as indeed can the main house. The main house can afford to have touring productions. Theatre Clwyd, wonderful Welsh touring theatre company, doing some tremendous work and has done some tremendous work here. They did a wonderful Cat on a Hot Tin Roof not so recently, an excellent Hamlet, and a pretty good Under Milkwood too. There are a plethora of touring companies that can come in doing the things that the arena doesn't do, that the Albert Hall won't do. And we can now be an all-embracing community theatre. The cultural hub is potentially a very invigorating cultural theatre experience in the arts wing, maybe possibly even in the main house, with multicultural events for the community. And indeed, I think, drama could be seen to focus on that as well. Theatre isn't just Shakespeare any more than it's West End farce. It is a wide, broad Catholic church, and entertainment is the name of the game, and people can be as entertained watching a complex Samuel Beckett one-hander as they can be watching Charlie's Aunt. Entertainment is one man's meat and another person's poison. They would define entertainment in completely differing ways. But there is a wide audience for a wide variety of entertainment. And I think that the Grand has a niche and it can do this. So, in a word, with Grand Ambition, with Fluellen, and with other visiting theatre companies, it could be a great spring. I firmly believe, I remember working with Michael Bogdanov, excellent theatre director who worked in this theatre, and who I remember actually said that he thinks the Grand Theatre is the finest example of a Victorian working theatre that he knows in the country. And he always believed in the marketplace principle of theatre, meaning the more theatre there is available, the more people will go to the theatre. Just as in a marketplace, you may not go and see one little stall based in the high street, but you go to a whole arena where there's lots of stalls, and you will go there because there's a whole lot of stalls. And I think it is a market, and I fully endorse that belief of his. Theatre is a habit-forming marketplace, and the more theatre there is, the more people will come. Of that I am absolutely convinced.